The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has called for a quick ceasefire in Ukraine in order to speed up peace talks. He was speaking in Kyiv, which he's visiting for the first time since Russia's invasion. Mr. Orban is seen as close to President Putin and has repeatedly criticized the EU and NATO for offering Ukraine military aid. Ukraine's President Zelensky said it was essential for Europe to retain its military support against what he called Russian terror.
First, I am grateful to Hungary for the support of our people, and for the humanitarian support of Ukraine. Every manifestation of defending life is important to us. Second, Hungary participated in the first peace summit and has supported the communiqué of the summit, and this speaks about the readiness of Hungary to become effective in realizing real, long-awaited security in our country and our entire region and Europe. Today we discussed in detail how Hungary can further demonstrate its leadership in the preparation of the second summit. We see the possibility of organizing a second summit already this year. We would very much like it, and we can do all the preparatory work for it in the coming months. We will be grateful to Hungary for its help and activity, to all of us in Europe. It is crucial that the European support of Ukraine remains at a sufficient level, including our defense from Russian terror. It is important that the relationship between all neighbors in Europe becomes more deep and effective.
President Zelensky there. Unfortunately, we didn't have the clip of Viktor Orban speaking, but we know what he said. Let's cross live to London and speak with Arise European Affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, you didn't see it in that clip, but I mean you're across it. He's called for a quick ceasefire in Ukraine in order to speed up peace talks. What do you make of that?
Well, he has a totally different vision of the peace process to President Zelensky. If he's calling for a ceasefire, the implication is quite clear that the Russian-occupied territory remains occupied for the time being, which is directly at odds at President Zelensky's vision that Russia must abandon all its occupied territory in order for there to be peace talks. So any talk of the two seeing eye to eye is simply eyewash.
Indeed, and in order for us to come up to where you are in terms of understanding the issues here, just tell us more about the background to this visit, because I would have thought that Viktor Orban would be about as welcome in Kyiv as a Russian parachute regiment.
Yes, more or less along those lines. But reality and must also have a part. Hungary is in charge of the EU presidency for 6 months. That is why Orban is going, though I don't suppose he much wanted it. That is why President Zelensky greeted him, though I don't suppose he much wanted to either. The fact of the matter is that Hungary is a key player for the next 6 months, and what it says or does, how it speeds up the process or does not, whether aid comes from Europe or not, very much hinges upon Hungary's view. Therefore, the problem here for President Zelensky is that Viktor Orban, so far, has shown a totally different view. And by asking for a quick ceasefire, he is certainly not in any great agreement with President Zelensky. And therefore, the talks, on the whole, will prove to be pleasant enough, of course, but ultimately sterile in the sense that neither side will get what it wants.
I just want to push a little bit further. Again, I know you were not a fly on the wall at that meeting, but I mean, Mr. Orban talking about a ceasefire. I mean, presumably he's probably got, some information from the Russian side, because he just seemed to, I mean, he came out with it, saying he suggested to President Zelensky that there should be a quick ceasefire, which he said would speed up the talks, peace talks. So he must know something.
That's an interesting hypothesis, but it's not necessarily true. The point is that Russia has, of course, put forward peace proposals which everybody has rejected, apart from Russia's allies. Equally, Ukraine has put forward peace proposals which Russia and her allies have not accepted. And what President Zelensky is doing is, I think, simply offering his opinion in this, as opposed to being in some way connected with Russia. It's unclear whether he receives any instructions from Russia or anything at all from Russia in that respect. Rather, he is echoing his viewpoint as president of Hungary. He once said famously that if there's a war between Ukraine and Russia, he is on Hungary's side. So in other words, I simply think that he would like the war to end. It's for him one gigantic nuisance. And more to the point, there is also, if you like, some unfinished business underlying this, the treatment of the Hungarian minority within Ukraine.
Right, that's an important point, but a slightly different question. I mean, so how well do you think that idea is going to go down in Kyiv? I know you touched on it a little bit, but obviously we don't know what Mr. Zelensky might have said in private about a ceasefire to Mr. Orban. But publicly, the Ukrainians have always felt that any talk of a ceasefire would just be an opportunity for Russia to build up its military and then come back against Ukraine.
Precisely. Whether it will come back against Ukraine is another aspect, but of a certainty it will be able to dig in properly. And Ukraine has under no circumstances shown any sort of inclination to accept any sort of ceasefire, or for that matter, cede anything to the Russians at all. Therefore, I assume, as I said at the very start, these talks will be sterile in the sense that President Zelensky will not accept a ceasefire, and President Orban has no real interest in this war, would prefer it to stop. And as far as he's concerned, supplying Ukraine with money and materials is just a gigantic black hole, which is pouring in resources which would be better spent on the EU and, of course, specifically on Ukraine, on Hungary itself.
So basically, with Mr. Orban holding the EU rotating presidency, he and Volodymyr Zelensky really do have to deal with each other, even if they don't want to.
Yes, but there is another aspect, it's the French elections. You see, right now, it would appear that the far right will win. If that is the case, then President Orban, as head of EU, will have an ally, because the French will not, by everything that's the far right has stated, are not going to support and give Ukraine a blank check in the same sense that President Macron would like. Also, of course, in the offing are the American elections. Following the car crash interview, as has been described of President Biden's performance, it would appear that Trump is on the rise, and therefore, again, Hungarian views have more support than meets the eye, and therefore there is no actual real pressure on Hungary to necessarily toe Ukraine's line. This would imply that President Zelensky, although he must deal with President Orban, will find the EU more reluctant over the next 6 months to make supplies than otherwise would be the case. And therefore, all this is, of course, good news for the Russians, because they can see certainly some prospect of winning, in some sense, the war if Le Pen wins and if President Trump wins, and during the period when Hungary has the presidency.
Love the way that you're tying it all together. Thank you very much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is Arise European Affairs analyst. He was talking to me there on the line from London.